microscope and telescope. Before then, truths were whatever seemed right to the senses.
But behind the microscope and the telescope, there's always man, flawed man. So when Neil Tyson, or any scientist, wants to say, well, we know the evidence, really? Really, because man is flawed and man often has ulterior motives. I mean, we saw that most definitely during 2020. There were ulterior motives for many of the scientific evidence that they brought forward. That ended up not being evidence. But here's something that Neil Tyson would never really want to address, okay? Because again, he's a scientist. He's put himself on a pedestal of knowing all. All of the science does this. It's that stuff I talk about with the higher education. It makes these people lose a moral compass. They don't seem to think that stuff's important. Anyway, so you people in science have ignored the evidence of God forever. There's evidence for it. I mean, it's one thing. You ignore the evidence of the four Gospels. I mean, that's four testimonies that would hold up in court. But you ignore that evidence because it doesn't fit with your narrative, right? Because that's what man always has. It has its own motives. Most especially science does. So, you also ignore the evidence of the millions around the world that since the AA Big Book came out, that have gotten sober through because AA it's eventually you may start out as an atheist, but you stick with it, you're going to find out that no, there is a God. And science can't do anything, nor will science ever be able to fix the alcoholic or the addict, because it's a spiritual void. Dr. Bob, who was a surgeon, knew that. He was one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. Yes, him and Bill Wilson. So the millions around the world that have recovered from that, science has always wanted to ignore. In fact, most of your scientific papers try to do what they can to rip AA apart. Oh, well, we don't know that it's... Yeah, no, when there's millions around the world that have had... basically, you end up having a spiritual awakening, is what happens, and you realize no, it's only God that could get you sober, but not just get you sobered. I mean, God does a whole makeover. So God doesn't just help you not drink anymore. God literally, from the inside out, transforms you. And there's millions, and that's evidence. That's evidence, but it's evidence the science doesn't like, because the science has always wanted to be God. Neil Tyson is just another example of why people just kind of see scientists as arrogant. But they're flawed men, because we're all flawed. Yet what you've done is mock God, which is why science is getting a major smackdown, as I say all the time. That's why science is getting a major smackdown. You've went on and done all this stuff, and then it comes out in 2020 about how the peer-reviewed, was controlled. I did many videos on this. I know that Eric Weinstein just talked about this on Joe Rogan, but 2 years ago I was doing videos on YouTube and on TikTok about this, that the peer-reviewed for medicine were being controlled by Ghislaine Maxwell's father, Robert Maxwell. He owned Pergamon Press. He pushed away many studies that have to do with schizophrenia, quite frankly. But many he did. He picked and chose. Like he was controlling it all. So see, that's what happens. Everybody wants to lay their hat on the peer-reviewed. Still flawed man. So it doesn't matter about the microscopes or the telescopes. But what does matter is that you don't go down your scientific road path without God. And the science has. Which is why the science has been exposed for not being about evidence, being more about wanting to elevate science because you've wanted to become God. Yeah, that's a big mistake. You should have known, but you don't believe in God, of course. But you should have known eventually God would have a problem with that. So it doesn't matter if the telescope, the microscope, all of that stuff came out. The fact is, most of your medicinal and ideas came from the Greek gods. Yeah, I think the Bible talks about who the Greek gods are. because you guys hang everything on Asclepius and all those Greek magicians. Really, I mean, it was it was pharmakia. It was about wizardry in the beginning. But of course, like any good narcissist or sociopath, we have to throw you some good things every once in a while, so you think that we're really the experts. Because what has science role been their whole history? It's been to disprove God. I mean, if you bring up God to somebody like Neil Tyson or any of these scientists, can't even. Like, that's how juvenile they are. That's how juvenile their thinking is. But their thinking is so juvenile that they can't stop and think about that there's a man or woman behind that microscope or telescope. And if they have a certain motive to take the public in a certain direction or make them believe, they can just twist and turn and play with numbers as much as they want. The most important thing is to have a relationship with Jesus Christ, because then you really can see the forest for the trees. You don't even need a microscope then.